When the president of Italy rejected the proposed finance minister, the ostensible explanation was, well, it's okay to have an anti-Euro finance minister, but not if you didn't campaign on it. Otherwise, that's a bait and switch. Do you expect in this, when we have another election, for the more populist parties to campaign on a more explicitly Eurosceptic platform?
I don't think we'll be seeing that. I do think we'll be seeing a new election because the technocratic caretaker government that's been appointed is unlikely to get the vote of confidence that it needs in Parliament. So we'll be heading to new elections. But the two kind of populist parties, Five Star Movement and Lega, who've campaigned on a very anti-migration kind of Eurosceptic platform, have not made an anti-Euro platform their base. Why? Because Italian voters are Eurosceptic. They like these arguments that Lega is making about, the Italian economy all being kind of the woe of Germany and Brussels. But Italian voters, similar to Greece in 2015, they don't actually want to leave the euro. So the reason why Lega and Five Star didn't openly campaign on that is because the ambiguity on the euro position actually benefited them. So I don't think that when we go into new elections, they will campaign on an anti-euro platform, which then takes us back to exactly the same crisis that we have now, because had the president allowed the choice for finance minister to come into office, it would have been a self-fulfilling crisis and Italy would have sleepwalked out of the euro. Now, we're going to have the caretaker government, new elections, nothing's going to change. So in terms of for markets and investors, it looks like a pretty grim outlook for Italy, because I don't see how this situation is going to resolve and the euro nightmare rumbles on in Italy.
Nina, what's fascinating to me, though, is looking at what we've seen from recent polls, and that's the League gaining greater support on a relative basis than the Five Star Movement. So if we do go to fresh elections and it happens in July 29th is the date that's being mooted, that we could actually see some form of centre-right coalition as a prospect again, a Berlusconi Forza Italia with the League tying up and sort of pushing the Five Star out simply because they have enough votes to do it.
Yeah, well, I think the League, let's not forget that the League has been around for a very long time. Five Star is a kind of populistic, fairly nascent political party, but the League is very organized. And I think all polls suggest that if a new election was to be held, that they would be the big winners of the race. And Italy observers say that, despite the fact that League and Five Star have been putting on a united front, that actually behind the scenes, the League might have very, very cleverly been manipulating this ploy, because the fact is that after their choice for finance minister was rejected, they could have come back with another name.
Yes.
By the way, it was well within the president's constitutional duty to do so. This has been done in the past by Italian presidents, but they refused to budge on that. And that leads me to think that perhaps the League is playing a very, very sophisticated political game where they think that if another election is held, that they will do even better and they will not have to make compromises with Five Star. If they do go back into coalition with Forza Italia, failing the 40% majority that they'd need to have in Parliament, it's clear that Forza Italia would be the very junior partner in that coalition. Forza Italia is tanking, all the other parties are remaining static, and it looks like the League, at least the latest polls indicate, they seem to be the big winner out of this. And it's unsurprising if you look at what the leader of the League, Salvini, has been saying and his overtures on social media. Of course, he's been keen to portray this as an attack on democracy, but realistically, it's not. The president was acting well within his constitutional right.
Let's talk about that specific point, because as you say, and as other commentators have said, the president certainly had the prerogative under the Constitution to reject this finance minister. There is this other view, and I think a lot of non-Italians sort of raise their eyebrows at it, and obviously these parties would like to make a big deal out of it. They're like, sure, it's his right, but it's really bad, and it seems to undermine democracy. How do you sort of reconcile those two views? Can it be well within his rights, but also a move that may backfire and undermine the current constitutional structure?
Well, I don't think it undermines the current constitutional structure. I mean, Mattarella, really, the president, was between a rock and a hard place, because had he approved Savona, which was the proposed finance minister, an 82-year-old Eurosceptic who has a plan B to leave the euro, you'd basically have had a self-fulfilling crisis take place in Italy. So he couldn't have allowed that to happen. Nonetheless, And by the way, Mattarella has not said that Italy should not leave the euro. He simply said that if this is to happen, then there needs to be an open debate about it, and this needs to take place in the election campaign before the election. And by the way, the two parties didn't have this in their coalition agreement either. So the people actually haven't had a chance to vote on it. So that holds true. Nonetheless, you're absolutely right that the populist parties will seize upon this and use this to make political gains in the next election. So this is my primary point. We'll kind of be stuck in, if there is a new election, we'll kind of be stuck exactly where we are right now again.
What impact does market pressure have, Nina? Because it does have odes of 2011 when former Prime Minister Napolitano and Angela Merkel were accused of conspiring to oust Silvio Berlusconi, and that's indeed exactly what happened. So to what extent do voters, do these potential party leaders watch what's happening in the markets? And if the ECB does stand back and allow spreads to continue to widen, and the moves today have been quite dramatic, what part does that play in voting intentions?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and there was a little bit of controversy today when one of the EU commissioners came out and said, you know, the market pressure will soon show Italian voters that this would be a terrible idea. And he was quickly kind of put down by Donald Tusk, the head of the European Council, saying, you know, we as the EU institutions are here to serve. We're not here to lecture voters. Fundamentally, I think that this is, like with many of the political movements that you see around Europe, this populist wave, it's a very emotive issue. And it might not have much to do with what makes economic sense. I mean, clearly we've seen that the thought of Italy returning to the lira is very scary for investors, and they'll sell off their Italian assets. But whether or not that will be a defining parameter for voters, I don't think that would be the case. It's an emotional issue. I don't think it's one that makes much economic sense.
Nina, spillover. There was a little bit of anxiety today in Portuguese assets, some selling of Spanish assets. In your view, is this an Italy-specific issue right now?
Of course, it's larger than Italy. Italy is the third largest economy in the Eurozone. And if you basically have two populist parties who've kind of stormed the election and are likely to do better in the forthcoming elections, and I mean, in particular, the League, even though they've tempered down their rhetoric on leaving the euro, I think if you study what Salvini actually thinks and what the League actually thinks, they literally want to leave the euro because they think it's been bad for Italy. Now, put that in the worst kind of take that argument to its ultimate conclusion, and were Italy to actually leave the Eurozone, I think that the effects of that will not only be felt in Spain and Portugal, but the rest of Europe and the world. And
as we were saying earlier on the show, it's pretty complicated to do that. They've got to have a referendum on constitutional change and then a referendum on whether or not they decide to leave the euro. So given the workings of changing the constitution in Italy, that would be a real project. I want to drag you, though, onto other potential spillovers. And Greece is expected, or at least hoping, to exit their bailout program. What's the risk that rising yields, if we do see greater spillover effects into the likes of Spain, Portugal and Greece, of the like that we've seen today, that actually it derails Greece's chance of an exit of their bailout program this year?
Well, I'm not a markets expert, but I think that at least when it comes to the Eurozone, I think that Greece seems to have been contained for now. And you can draw a parallel between what we see happening in Italy and Greece, where populist politicians come to power and promise the electorate something. So in the case of Greece, it was that you can have a debt write-off, but you don't have to leave the euro and the Eurozone. Similarly, in Italy, they know that the voters don't actually want to leave the euro, neither necessarily the EU, but they also want to have a plan B for exiting the euro. So these are claims made by populist politicians which are simply not, you can't reconcile the two. Although with the case of Greece, it was able to be contained. Again, my point is, if Italy is really flirting with the Eurozone exit, then that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah.